I spent a lot of time of my working life traveling the world, and what I would do in my time off is to go into second-hand bookshops and buy books rather than look for bars and dancing places. This was my relaxation. But look for old maps as well. I started collecting old maps 50 years ago. Well, the main bulk of the maps and the books themselves initially was the Amazon. I took a year off. Well, my background is that of a surveyor, a map maker, and mostly in the third world. I spent 7 years in different parts of Africa and 13 years in South America, various countries in South America. And while I was there, I got interested in the Amazon. I did some travels on the upper waters, the headwaters of the Amazon, and going through there on the canoes, it just, the mystery of how these guys map the Amazon, because I was using modern equipment and so on to make maps, aerial photographs, and in the latter end of the career, GPS and all that. But how were these people, 200 or 300 years ago, doing it? And so I set out to try and sort of answer that question: how was the Amazon mapped? And so I started collecting stories of explorers, stories of the map makers, and their maps. What I did is I wanted to improve my skills and create a portfolio of articles. So I mined the resource of my researches into a series of articles, and I had about 20 articles published. But luckily, one of the articles was read. I mentioned in passing that I now lived in Victoria. I had been living in Vancouver at that time, and this article was read by a publisher in Victoria, Marlin Horsdal, who contacted me and said, "Come in and have a chat." And we did so, and she agreed that the project of the mapping of the Amazon was a major project, and it needed a big international house to do so, somebody in London or New York or Los Angeles. But if ever I came up with a subject of more local interest, then she'd be interested in talking to me. But I was working. I got a job here in a high-tech mapping company here, and then I retired in about just about the year 2000. I think I retired for various personal reasons, but also I got very interested in the history of Vancouver Island, and a good friend of mine from Vancouver, Derek Hayes, who's published a wonderful series of atlases, historical atlases, and books about trains and railways and ships, and he's very prolific and very good. And he suggested, when I came to Victoria, that maybe the history of the mapping of Vancouver Island would be an idea. So yes, I agreed it would be, and I contacted Marlin again, and yes, she said yes. She thought it was a good idea. Go away and do it. The manuscript I brought back to her was exactly twice the length of a book that could be published. So I was given it and said, "Take it away," and cut it in half. And how do you go about that? Do you sort of cut out every other paragraph or every other chapter, or what do you do? But happily, it was about the exploration and the mapping of the Vancouver Island. So it split apart like DNA, the exploration and the mapping. So and it was the word count was exactly half, and so that was the first part. The first book I published, The Land of Heart's Delight, which brought the story right from zero knowledge, guesswork, about this coast through to the start of the First World War. But a lot of the material was already done when I came to do the second one, which is the story of the explorers, all the ships and the people themselves, stories of the people themselves that were involved in the exploration of mapping. And that one I called A Perfect Eden, which is a phrase I borrowed from James Douglas, which when he first came to the southern end of Vancouver Island, that's what he said when he saw the Garry Oak meadows and the fields of camas and the lush pasture land, and he said that, you know, what a perfect place it is, a piece of heaven. Another lifelong hobby of mine, the wildlife, bird watching and butterflies and vegetation and flowers and forest trees and so on. It turned into a third book about the story of the early naturalists, how the natural world was reported in the form of travel reports and so on. And so this was my third book, In Nature's Realm, and that's the story really from. It takes the story from the first naturalists, who were of course the First Nations that came down here, and I subscribe to the theory that the first humans here came down the Kelp Highway from Alaska. They came by sea rather than through a gap in the ice field, and they came down. Clearly, there was a great wealth of the ecosystems of the kelp forest and the land forest as well. And so these seafaring people, accustomed to living off both the ocean and the coast and the forest itself. And I start the first chapter is the first naturalists, and then the various naturalists that accompanied the exploring expeditions. Because these exploring expeditions had a mandate to not only find new lands and find what was there geographically, they also had to investigate if there were any resources that were exploitable. That I was interested in the stories of how the surveying was done in the early days, and well, that coupled with another lifelong obsession. I'm a collector. I collect things, and I have done since boyhood. Birds' eggs and butterflies and so on, as it was a fairly common hobby by English schoolboys in those days. Quite permissible then, absolutely and rightfully not allowed these days. And over here I've got my collection of birds' eggs from those days, and which I treasure, but with embarrassment. But the butterflies, I converted myself to photographing them, not killing them. Yes, I am. It's the fourth book of my trilogy. Like Douglas Adams. He had 5 in his trilogy. Yes, it's called Turmoil. It comes from a character that was in all 3 of the first books, a man called Philip Hankin, who came first of all as a young naval officer with one of the survey ships, 2 of the survey ships here. And he did some exploring. He did a pioneering trip across the north end of the island, and wrote up a very nice report and produced a really creditable map, which got included in the final map, the chart of the area. And so I found in the archives that he'd written in later life his memoir, the memoir of his very long life. And so I switched tack. Instead of collecting stories of different explorers and different map makers, pursuing just one thread, this man's life, a biography. He had a few years here in the Navy, and then retired early. He didn't like naval life, but what happened is the gold bug bit him while he was here, and so he came back to Vancouver Island, but with the intent to go into the Caribou. And he hadn't got any money. He managed to get to the Caribou, and he walked from Yale to Barkerville in April, which is through snow because Barkerville is pretty high. And he arrived, and he had about $1.50 left in his pocket, which he spent on some toast and a cup of coffee, and sat by the fire in a hotel. And he couldn't stay there the night, so he left and found a derelict shed, and dossed down in the shed. And then and he didn't make good in the gold. He after a few months he gave up and came back down to Victoria. And 6 years later, that same man was acting head of government.